What's happening? What's happening? And what's happening, blues people? Welcome to another episode of the African American Folklorist of the Month, where we honor the culture keepers, scholars, storytellers, tradition bearers, preservationists, and community workers who help us remember who we are, where we come from, and what our people have carried across generations. This month, we are more than honored to feature Dr. Shari L. Williams, Executive Director of the Macon County Archaeology Project, and a public historian whose work is deeply rooted in Macon County, Alabama, and the broader Black Belt South. Dr. Williams is the first African American woman to earn a Ph.D. in history from Auburn University. But her work is not only about academic achievement. It is about service, memory, land, and responsibility. Her path into public history began through nonprofit volunteer work in historic preservation in Macon County. That work opened the door to a larger calling, preserving and interpreting the rural historic landscapes and cultural traditions of Alabama's Black Belt. Her scholarship looks at the past, present, and future of rural communities through the lens of race, gender, and class. Her chapter, Death Cannot Make Our Souls Afraid, Mosaic Templars of America Headstones in Macon County, Alabama, 1887 and 1931, published in Grave History, Death, Race, and Gender in Southern Cemeteries, help us understand cemeteries not simply as burial grounds, but as archives of Black life, mutual aid, dignity, memory, and resistance. Through the Ridge Interpretive Center and the Alabama Old Federal Road Museum, Dr. Williams continues to build a bridge between scholarship and community. The Ridge Project honors a cluster of historic communities located along a ridge line in southeast Macon County, Alabama, where Native Americans created a trading path long ago. That path later became part of the Federal Road, a major route into the Old Southwest during the Alabama Fever Land Rush. So today, we are talking about land as archive. We are talking about roads as memory. We are talking about cemeteries as testimony. We are talking about Black Belt communities as breathing histories. We are talking about Dr. Shari L. Williams as a public historian, preservationist, scholar, and steward of memory. And we are honored to name her June's African American Folklorist of the Month. Dr. Williams, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well too. We met in Alabama at the Folk Life conference.
Yes.
When you first shared with me this amazing work.
Yes.
It's been some time. I have
Yeah.
quite a few questions, but I think, if you don't mind, I would like to start with you sharing, do you see yourself as a folklorist or as a public historian, a preservationist, community scholar, all of the above, or something totally, entirely different?
Oh, that's a great question. I primarily see myself as a public historian. History, modern U.S. history from 1865 to the present. And also because as I think about and I write about the history of the Ridge Project area and other histories that I've written about, I'm always asking the questions that historians ask. So it's like, what is the context of whatever it is I'm looking at? What about change over time? What are the causes? What's the complexity? What are the contingencies? All of that sort of thing. But as you said, my work also encompasses historic preservation and community scholarship. And so that part of it involves just understanding the stories and traditions, and even the cultural and historical sites that still remain in the area, such as cemeteries and churches. And so it means interacting with descendant community members and listening to their stories and memories. And so while I don't technically consider myself to be a folklorist in the pure sense of that discipline, I think my work as a public historian incorporates elements of methods that folklorists use, such as gathering oral histories.
Okay, okay. All right, I dig it. I dig it. So, we're gonna go we're gonna go a little deeper into that, but I wanted to set it up with that and how you see yourself in within this parameter, so that we can now go into your backstory. How did we even get here? How did you get here?
Oh, I love being asked that question because I get a chance to talk about my family and the real personal connection that I have to all of this. So, this really started a long time ago before I was even aware of it. And it really started with me looking into my family history. I could spend an hour talking to you about my upbringing and whatnot, and circumstances that kind of positioned me to just ask the question, where do I come from? I think a lot sooner than it does for a lot of people. Like a lot of people, that question doesn't pop into their minds until they get into their maybe mid 40s and 50s. And I had that question pretty early on. So I asked my grandmother, my mom's mom, my maternal grandmother, about her parents' names, and my grandfather, her husband, his parents' names, and I wrote them down a little piece of paper and tucked them away. So that was a question I asked in my 20s. And then 20 years later, I started really digging into the family history research. And long story short, both of my grandparents are from South Macon County, Alabama, from a little rural village called Creekstand. And I got a chance to visit there when I was in my late 30s. And that just kind of sparked the interest in historic preservation and history, and just this curiosity that was just overwhelming. Like I couldn't leave it alone. You know, I just had a ton of questions, and almost every answer led to another ton of questions. And so that's how we're here. And I can talk about how the Ridge Project came out of that later if you want me to, or I can
Well,
talk
we can
about
go
it
right
now.
into that right now.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, as a family historian, I'm not a certified genealogist, but I'll call myself a genealogist. You know, you do a lot of census research. So you start looking for ancestors, you start at the latest census and work backwards. But at some point, it's just information on a page, like writing on a page. And for me, it was like the first time I visited Creekstand, like I said, was when I was in my late 30s. And I visited the ancestral church and cemetery and just wanted to know. I mean, it was like it hadn't really changed that much over time. And I just really wanted to know how they got there, you know. And so that led to finding out about this historic road that was so major for Alabama becoming Alabama. It's called the Federal Road, like you mentioned. And I just wanted to know more about that. So, in doing that and getting to know people, like I call them my people in the preservation community and genealogy community, learned that, you know, there are grants and other ways to really do that deep dive and so that just kind of led to finding out about nominating historic cemeteries to the Alabama Historic Cemetery Register, which is what happened with my ancestral church's cemetery. Nominated that to the Register, Alabama Historic Cemetery Register, and then we had a celebration of that and a marker dedication, and it was just phenomenal, and I just got hooked. And from there, wanting to expand that even farther into the community. And that's when I um, got the idea to start the Ridge Project. Actually, I have to give credit where credit is due. I had a couple of folks who I respect. One of them is not with us anymore. Deborah Gray at the Tuskegee History Center, and T.C. Coley, who's still working in preservation with the Black Heritage Council of the Historical Commission, was working with them off and on, and they just in passing one day said, "Why don't you apply for a grant for archaeology projects?" And I had never applied for a grant before, but I did apply for a grant with the Alabama Historical Commission, and the rest is history as far as that goes. And I could go on and on and on, but so you have to cut me off because I'm a talker.
No, that's quite all right. That's the purpose of this platform. We're celebrating you and your work, and looking to get a little a background into the whys, the whats, and the hows. And speaking of the whys and the whats, is it safe to say this really was spot? You did say this, but I'm trying to dig for a little deeper, and not deeper, that's the wrong way to word it, but some more details on this connection, because it sounds like this all sparks from a connection to you and your family.
Yes, yes. So yeah, when I was talking about how this started long ago and I wasn't even aware of it, um, and I didn't go into this in a lot of detail, but my mom's mom, her name was Ella Berry. Berry was her maiden name, and her married name was Hubbard. She lived to be in her early 90s. And one of the things that she did, like I grew up, I was in elementary school in the 60s, started middle school in the late 60s, and graduated from high school in 74. So at that time, people were still getting together. Like my grandparents were part of the Great Migration. They moved from Alabama to, I think they went to Pennsylvania first, and then they went to Michigan, and they ended up in Akron. And my grandfather worked in the rubber factories there. Well, he worked in one. But anyway, she would still talk about home. And she had this dialect, from being from the South. And she didn't call Creek Stand, she called it Krish Stand. And she called Warrior Stand, Wash Stand. And so I'm like, what is she talking about? What are these places? And she would talk about cousins, like your cousin down there and this. And then after my grandfather passed, she would go to Creek Stand every summer. I'm sorry, every winter, and stay there because it was cold in Ohio, So she would go to Alabama where it's warm. Plus, she had a little gentleman friend down there, and so she just planted this seed in me, like this curiosity about, these places that I would hear her talk about. And I would wonder, well, how are we cousins with these people? And who are, just what is this all about? So yeah, so that is really major in my story about, how I got from point A to point B.
I love it. Now here's the one thing in, I guess you could say, my journey of highlighting our scholars and cultural workers. Um, Usually, that story leads to an unbeknownst folklorist, but yours didn't lead to an unbeknownst folklorist. It led to history and a preservationist, which I believe they're all connected, but they are right. So, was it a moment that you said, "I am a historian"? How did that come up? How did you get there?
Well, I think it was after the Ridge Project started, and it didn't start in a vacuum. Like it wasn't all just me, you know. I applied for the grant, of course, but that was prompted by, people who saw something, saw potential and suggested I do that. But I started to meet people like Glenn Drummond, who at the time he was this is a guy who just out of his own sense of giving, like rescued probate court records from the Macon County courthouse. And so he was really into like preserving those records. He was also very much into the indigenous history of the area. So I met him and I met other people along the way, and I started to feel like like I was like a sponge. I was soaking up things that I was learning, but I also felt like I just was not up to speed, I guess is a way to put it. And so the Ridge Project was founded in 2011, got incorporated in Alabama in 2012, became a 501c3. But in 2016, I was nearing the end of my career in HR, human resources in Muskogee County. I live in Columbus, and I was already thinking about how to go to the next level with the Ridge, and I felt like one way to do that was to work on myself. And I felt like if I want to write about this history and I want to know, I want to do it right, and I want to have the credibility that I needed to get a PhD in history. So that's what I did.
Well, I mean, I love it. I love it, and it was intentional,
Oh, very
right?
much so. Yeah. Like who goes back to college at age 60
To get a
to work on
PhD.
a PhD?
So you know what? That's a great segue. So you went back to college to earn a PhD as a non-traditional student, yet you made history simultaneously.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, that was not even on my radar. I just knew what I needed to do for myself and what I needed to do to help the organization move forward. And it wasn't until I was about to graduate that I started wondering, I wonder, because I knew Burtis English, I think, um, was like in the top one or two. Like he was either the first or the second. Gosh, I can't. Oh gosh, the other scholar's name. But anyway, I just kept asking. Have there been any other Black women? And finally, the answer was no. And I'm like, oh my god.
So did that inadvertently put icing on the cake?
Well, it was great. I mean, it was nice. Like I said, I didn't go into it trying to do that, right? That was not the goal of the accomplishment. So it was nice. I was really pleased and happy about it. But I think I would say the icing on the cake for me at the end was being hooded by uh the first African American man to attend Auburn University,
Wow.
Franklin. Gosh, when you get this old, your brain stops. Okay, I have to just Google it and come back to it. But yeah, he hooded me at commencement, and I think that was the cherry on the top.
No, I dig it. I dig it. Well, it kind of also is a telltale of your work carrying the memory and carrying the narrative forward, right?
Right.
Um, could you talk to us about the name, the Ridge Project, and the Ridge Macon County Archaeology Project. Talk to us about the name and what you guys actually are doing.
Okay, all right, that's a fun story. So, when I applied for the grant, it was for a creek stand archaeology project, I think. But as you know, I was working with Glenn and several other individuals. People from the Creek Stand Church were in conversations with us, and I started learning more about the area. I learned that it wasn't just about the Creek Stand community; it was about all of these interconnected communities in South Macon. But the name The Ridge comes from, it was actually suggested by Glenn. It speaks to the topography of the land. So you mentioned the Native American trading path, in the introduction. Well, through South Macon County, that path, which became the federal road, it actually follows a ridge line. And what's important about a ridge line is that you don't have to cross over streams and other little water courses to make your travel. So they use the same trading path as Native Americans because, didn't have to worry about the fording those waterways. And so the name comes from the actual topography of the land. And what was the second part of your question? I forgot.
Well, just talk to us about the how it came about, and then what the project actually is, what you guys are
Okay.
working on.
Okay, all right. So yeah, the name is everything, right? So that was just a perfect name. And then wanted Macon County to be in the name because Macon County has been studied left, right, up, down, and all around. And a lot of those studies have been to either cast that region in the negative or focusing on deficits rather than the assets that are in that area. So it was important to include that reference to Macon County in there. So after we got the grant, it was important to open a place. Like, place is everything because when you drive through rural places like South Macon County, Alabama, it's, automatically you notice all the pine trees and you notice that they're not clusters like of homes that you would see in a subdivision. You see snakes, going across the road in the summertime, and you see raccoons and you see deer. And it's really easy to not understand how significant historically and culturally a place like that is. So establishing a sense of place was important for us, and that's why we opened the Interpretive Center. So it's actually sits at sort of like that apex of the ridge line, which is really kind of cool. That was not really intentional. It just so happened that a family member of mine from the community, his name was Willie Pace. He's not with us anymore. He knew we were looking for a place to house the center, and he had just bought this Jim Walter home. And he said, well, you can use that. And then on top of that, we were also looking for a viable archaeological dig site and had not had much success about 6 months into the project. And then one day, Dana at the time, Glenn at the time was very good friends with Dana Chandler, who used to be the head archivist at Tuskegee University. So Dana came out one day with a bunch of his buddies, and he was just walking the property, and he comes up to me with his hand out like this, and he's got all this stuff in his hand. And to my untrained eye at the time, it was stuff. But he started going through it and saying, oh, these are pieces of, they call them flakes, what's left after Native Americans would work a stone to work it into like a point or something like that. So the flakes are the things that they chip off. And he had that kind of stuff. I think archaeologists call it debitage. I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist. But he held out his hand and he said, you have your dig site right here. And so, in other words, it was in our own front yard. And
Wow.
so that's how the archaeological component really started to come to life with the project. And he brought students, Dana brought students in his summer history classes for 2 summers in a row out to do some digging, and we found some significant artifacts that suggest that that particular location may have had like a trading stop or something along the way. And we found artifacts from other parts of Alabama that are not typically found in that area, but there they are. And that's kind of the evidence of the, transient nature of things at that particular point in time. So, and we have artifacts that go back prehistory.
Wow.
All the way up until like the mid 20th century or so.
So this reminds me of a I guess you could say scholarship that I've been working on called blues ecology, where there's memory in the landscape. Have you found any sound and other archival goodies, if you will?
Did you, when you said sound, do you mean like literally like
Yes.
sound?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but my response is going to point back to what I said about the importance of interacting with community. I can give you several different examples of how that has yielded just wonderful information. But to answer the question about sound, is the name Albert Macon, Robert Thomas, George Daniels, are those familiar to you? They're all from that area. There was a woman who I related to by marriage, and she's now not with us any longer. Her name was Rose Kelly Washington. Do you remember she sang background for the Shoop Shoop song? So gosh, and the titles like went right out of my head. But so there's this history of not just the cultural history encompasses the arts, music, and quilting and other types of traditions, foodways, and those sort of things. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. You gave us examples of the soundscape through the vessels the sounds came from. I love it. Before I get to my next question, this is maybe a little bit off the cuff based on something you just said, which leads me to want to ask you, in your research, since you first had the seed planted in you as a young lady up until now, how many folk in this county are you related to?
Wow, that is a great question. A lot. I'm a ancestry.com geek. I will admit to that. And I did the DNA and all of that. And my connections, I have some obvious ones, right? Some like DNA matches that are obvious that, because I already knew about these people, or at least that branch of the family tree. But there are matches that I have to people from that area, and I have no idea how I'm related to those folks, other than to say that it probably goes back before, there was vital records recorded about marriages and that sort of thing. Or, even back to the antebellum era, where people were enslaved on the same plantation and they married and had children. And, these DNA matches are the offspring of that. So it's really deep. One of my board members, I have a married couple on our board, Joanna and Curling Robinson, and Curling's ancestors are from Macon County on the Reed side. And my younger brother has a DNA match to Curling. And we've known this for I think 3 or 4 years, but we still haven't figured out exactly how. And he's in California,
Oh,
like,
wow.
so this thing like spreads out all over the country. It's really amazing. Um, can I say one more thing about that?
Absolutely.
Um, for 20, because of that, and because I'm all about really wanting to help people understand how interconnected they really are. And I'm not just talking about across racial lines, I'm talking about even among African Americans. We did a DNA reveal at our 2024 Storytelling Festival. We found a person who was willing to do a DNA test and have those, results shared in a limited degree. And we talked about that at the festival. Was able to present this person with this is such a cool story. So years and years and years ago, I had found out about a Negro Leagues baseball player who had roots in Macon County. And so on eBay, I bought this little, it was like a little medallion or something that referenced the Negro Leagues. I can't remember what the inscription was on it, but it was for, uh, I think his name is James Sapp Ivory. He played for the Birmingham. Anyway, I'm not remembering names today. But anyway, it turns out that our DNA reveal person is related, directly related, closely related to that baseball player. And so what I did was during the reveal, I presented him with this little medallion that I had bought, had stuck it in a file drawer. Like, I don't know why I need this, but I know I need to buy it and I need to hold on to it. And then lo and behold, the opportunity came to actually give that to one of his family members. So that's the kind of thing that, it's almost magical, when it happens like that. And it continues to happen over and over and over again. As I do this work. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, I think that's a great segue. Um, I would love for you to discuss the work as it pertains to race, gender, and I guess all the other things in class, all the other things that kind of comes out of the work organically.
Okay. Well, but the first thing that comes to my mind is my chapter, tell another story.
I'm sorry, you froze. Can you start that
Okay.
again, please?
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. I was saying that your question about that, I was going to reference my chapter in grave history to sort of talk about interrogating the overlap of, or the impact of race and gender and class. Um, one of the pieces of written material that I was able to come across in just digging, for documented history about the area, because it's not been well recorded. But I came across a memoir of a woman named Eva Chandler Gagnon, Gagnon, who was born, I guess, in the late 1800s, was coming of age in the early 1900s. And her family had land and lived in Macon County. Now, this is a white woman, and she must have been, the memoir is called Home Place. It's out of print. She self-published it. Um, I would say, 95% of that memoir is about Black folks and what they did, and, how they behaved, when they were having their camp meetings. And, but it gives it gives this information from her perspective. Her family was not, rich along the lines of some planter, the planter class, but they weren't yeoman farmers either. I think they did a little bit better than that. But she's relating all these stories, talking about Black people and what they did. So she gets into the subject of how they had funerals. And I was able to take her recollection of that and sort of weave it into scholarship on Black burial customs and cultural traditions, and sort of point out the contrast. Like, she's seeing it one way, like, they're noisy and they wail and they cry, and it's like that was a negative for this person from her perspective. But from the perspective of Black cultural traditions, this was perfectly what was almost expected and what was common. So to be able to make those comparisons, and not do it in a way that I don't know, sort of bash this woman because she was a product of her time, but just to be able to say, matter of factly, here's this perspective, but this is layering the traditions of African American burial traditions on top of that. This is what was happening, and this is what we need to understand about it. So, that's just one way that knowing stories from local people and being able to weave that into like more scholarly academic narratives on the same types of subjects has allowed me to be able to really race, class, and gender. And then, some of the disparaging things that she wrote about had to do with Black women. So that, just opened the door to talk about Black women and, their care of the community and how they demonstrated that care, how they took care of the body and they sat with the body and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I feel like I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I want to make sure I'm focused on the question at hand. There was something.
You're not rambling at all.
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that chiming thing. Let me see. Okay, I'll just ignore that. But anyway, getting back to the book, I think you had asked something a little bit more specific about race, class, and gender. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but you did mention the Mosaic Templars of America, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So some of that chapter that I wrote, or a lot of it, was about the Mosaic Templars of America, which was this mutual aid society, and it was actually an life insurance company that was very highly successful in the early decades of the 20th century, and it was Black owned and operated. It was based in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Booker T. Washington was a buddy of the founders, one of the founders of the Mosaic Templars of America. And so there are Mosaic Templars of America headstones in cemeteries in rural Macon County, and I would imagine in a lot of places in Alabama. But the significance for me was, okay, you got this mutual fraternal organization that's offering life insurance to African Americans. How did these folks in Macon County find out about it? Well, where was Booker T. Washington from? And I'm sure they had their own marketing program and, had representatives that went to these places. But I'm also sure that his influence and his being a member of it, and with the outreach program that Tuskegee had going on at the time, that's how people, even a couple of my ancestors became members of the Mosaic Templars of America. So that whole chapter again, you were asking about excavating these sort of like intersections between race and gender and class. That's just one example of what the landscape in Macon County helped me to be able to write about. Because I saw those headstones and I'm like, what is this?
Well, I'm so happy you said that because yet again, a great segue to what I
Okay.
wanted to ask you in regards to cemeteries and headstones and what they taught you about Black life, Black institution, family memory, and community survival in Macon County. Could you talk to us about that?
Well, sure. I mean, the cemeteries themselves, like my ancestral cemetery is a creek sand cemetery, but there's many others. There's a few miles. Are we still good? I didn't see you for a second.
No,
But if you
you froze.
okay.
After you said there's a few others.
Okay. Yeah, there's a Warrior Stand Cemetery. There's a cemetery at Antioch Church. There's a Sweet Pilgrim Cemetery. And several, the Creek Stand and the Sweet Pilgrim are on the Alabama Historical Cemetery Register. And then there's one now in Fort Davis, Alabama, that is. But when you walk into a cemetery, and especially if you know you have an ancestral connection to the people that are buried there, and especially if you've been looking at their names on census records for a long, long time, when you actually walk into a cemetery and you see their headstones, you feel like you know those people to
Mhm.
the point where you want to have a conversation with them because you and if you're lucky, you may have seen photographs of them. Um, but what they the from the standpoint of just that experience, but looking at how they're maintained as opposed to maybe white cemeteries that are in the area, it's sort of a commentary, I guess, on the past. And I'll give you an example. So the Warrior Stand Cemetery that I mentioned, it sits back off the road. And you don't know it's there unless you know it's there. But on one side of the cemetery are African Americans, and the graves are, I think you could say that there are some folks, not people who were enslaved necessarily, but people who lived during the end of the 19th century are buried there. And that's the African American side. But then on the other side, you have the grave sites of the white settlers that came to the area during the Alabama Fever land rush. And so when you actually enter that cemetery and you realize that this side is black and this side is white, the logical question is why? How? Who? Did these folks own these folks? And so that just opens a whole door of exploration, right? And further investigation of how that came to be. There are well, they were enslavers in their time that I've read their inventories where they list who they owned. And some of those people are buried, on the white side of the cemetery. And then if you go down to the Creek Stand Cemetery, there's a memorial chapel with a white cemetery beside it. And those are the settlers that settled that part of Macon County. And one of those settlers deeded the land for the African Americans to start their church at Creek Stand. So I guess my point is that cemeteries they can open doors and windows for taking a deeper dive into the history just by prompting the question why and how.
Mhm.
But also, shows you how things used to be, like the separation of the cemeteries is kind of speaks to the fact that at one point in time, you know, especially the older graves, and you know, because they say in Creekstand that was a slave cemetery before it was the church's cemetery, that they attended church, you know, under the watch, you know, of the white enslavers. And so that is just very stark when you see it in the landscape and how these cemeteries are arranged and how close in proximity they are. And probably the most telling thing, Lamont, is that the surnames of the people in the white cemeteries are the same. Many of them are the same as the surnames of people, the African American that are interned in the African American cemeteries. So it's just a story of interconnectedness that you just can't deny, no matter you
Right.
can't.
It sounds like a landscape of archive.
Yeah, yeah, and I love it when you put it that way. Because archive, you know, people have there's a connotation that goes with that, and it means that you're gonna find some things that are really revealing and informative. And you're right, landscapes are, we can read them, you know, just like we can read documents.
That's right. Well, I'm also hearing a lot of intersections. Initially, it was just really indigenous and black, but then when you added the settlers, so now
Oh,
we have a three-person people, if you will, intersection. How does that inform your work, and how does that inform this community, right? Because you know, there's a humongous overlapping between what people consider are black descendants of Africa and descendants of indigenous in this one space.
mhm. Well, I think, hmm, you're right. We do the work that we do at the Ridge, our educational programming, activities, and events are centered on the history of the Federal Road. And because you had three distinct cultural groups
Right.
interacting in that space during the period of Alabama fever settlement, and even somewhat after the Civil War, you have to foreground all three histories. Um, and I already talked about this memoir of this white woman and how it informed understanding. And so I think that the approach is not to discount any of it, right?
Mhm.
It's all relevant. Um, we have we are striving to incorporate more voices from descendants of the Creeks that possess that area until removal, um, because all of those stories are important for telling the full story. So that's one way that we handle it. But I keep going back to this theme of like understanding interconnections between people. And I actually put some thought into that a little bit as I was just thinking about talking with you today. And I'll go ahead and share this. Um, Once we get people to recognize, appreciate, and respect what they have in common historically and culturally, then we can get them to talking about their historical and cultural differences more honestly and respectfully in the present. Um, I think it's just really important, like I said, to foreground all three cultural perspectives. Other than the one I just gave you. Um, oh, okay. I thought of one. So one day I was with a colleague. He's a guy who's bi-discipline and astronomer, but loves to write these histories about roadways and migration pathways and things like that. His name's Larry Krumenacker. And we were trying to find a segment of the federal road that's near the ridge, but on private property. So we went down into the woods and we were looking around and we found it. And this truck pulls up. And, this white guy jumps out of the truck. And, Larry's white and he probably didn't think anything about it. And I'm standing there going, oh, no, we're on this man's land. And, he looks like he does and I look like I do, and what is going to happen? Well, it turned out it was a friendly conversation and he was fine with us, looking around. But on that site, there was a remnant of a cattle dipping vat. And so I didn't, get to talk to him a lot about it, but he said that his dad, had a cattle dipping operation going on. That just opens the door to, like, I could look at that one way. I could say, oh yeah, who, that's them. Or I could say, well, what was that all about? And so right now that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to find out some more information about that whole era and who it affected, and were Black farmers doing it, or was it just white farmers? So I don't know. That was maybe a little bit of a stretch, but I think I'm trying to answer your question.
No, you are answering, but I have to ask you a follow-up because I don't know how much of the audience knows what cattle dipping is.
Okay, well, cattle dipping was a way to rid cows of this notorious tick that would infect the cows, and I can't remember the technical terms, so I hope the listeners will forgive me for having so many brain lapses today. But it was really devastating to the cattle industry in Alabama. So the way to get rid of those pests was to take the cow and herd it into a vat of solution that would kill the ticks, and was later on found out to be harmful to the cows too. But anyway, that was the method that they used. So these vats were really narrow, sort of concrete walls, and the cow would just kind of walk down into it until they were submerged up to right about here, and then they would walk them out of it. And yeah, so it's a story about the economy, that economy in Alabama, the livestock, owning livestock and raising livestock, in the beef industry and all of that in Alabama. And it's a story that I really would like to dig into, but it's all from seeing the remnant of that bat on that land.
Wow. No, I dig it. So let's pivot a second, because you are, or were you, the president of the Alabama Folklife Association's board of directors?
Right now, I'm still the president. I think this is my last year. It'll change hands in October of this year. I started out just hanging out with folks, from AFA and going to some conferences like Folklife of the South, because there is an overlap between the work that the Ridge Project does and Folklife. And in fact, it took me a long time to figure out what folk life is. And I think my definition of that is still evolving. So don't ask me what it is.
You knew I was about to.
But it's about those cultural traditions that shape families, that shape regions, that shape towns and communities. It could be food ways, how people cook their food. It could be quilting. It could be blacksmithing. It could be holding a certain event every year to celebrate a certain thing. I mean, it's so broad. It's really broad, but it just really speaks about people's traditions, and the things that they do, the things that they make, the things that they create, whether it's a written word or baskets or, whatever. So yeah, I'm president. I started out being on the editorial board and helping to edit the journal called Tributaries that the Folklife Association publishes every year, late in the year, November or December of each year.
So, well, I guess coming from your discipline and then working with the Alabama Folklife Association, how much of an intersection between cultural preservation and history have you found in your work being immersed in all of this?
The intersection between preservation and folk life, I
Yes.
guess, is what you're asking.
Yes.
Whew. Okay, I'm going to answer that question in a really strange way, Lamont, because I'm sometimes not really good at thinking on my feet. So there is an abandoned general store across the road from the Ridge Interpretive Center it was once owned by Willie Pace. I mentioned him earlier. And now that he's passed on, his very close friend and companion she owns the store, and she's been cleaning it out, trying to figure out what to do with the property. And she saved some quilts for me. And I'm like, okay, I'm so glad she did this, but I didn't know what to expect. And so I got the quilts from her and started looking at them, and they're quilts like I've never seen before. So I called Emily Blaywa, who's the director of the Folklife Association, and said, who do you know in the state of Alabama that can tell me something about these quilts? And she did. And then I got a couple responses. And so now I have a little more understanding about and appreciation for these quilts. Had I not had that background and that understanding to know that when you look at an artifact, or you look at material culture, you really have to see it. You can't just look at it and go, oh, that's just a piece of junk, or that's old, or whatever. It might have some meaning. It might have some significance, and you owe it the respect to try to figure out what that is. And so I guess that's how I answer your question.
No, you absolutely did. I mean, that leads, I guess, to the idea of your interpretive center, right? Because that's the interesting name, interpretive. So I want to kind of make a double question, right? Talk
Okay.
to us about the word interpretive in the work, and then I guess the idea of the work being public facing, because essentially the work is not just for public consumption, but you're literally are not only just related to everyone, but it's a communal work, right?
Yeah, it is a communal work, and I'm glad you asked that question. The reason why it's not called a museum per se is because that that sort of format of presenting information and displaying artifacts and things would not do the job. It needs interpretation. It needs people telling you what it is, why it's significant, and how it connects to that community, how it connects to people. I first got the inspiration for calling it an interpretive center after we got started, and I was on my way from Selma home. I was going to Selma for have to give a shout out to the Black Belt African American Genealogical and Historical Society. So I probably was at a board meeting and
Mhm.
was on my way home, and I passed the Lowndes County Interpretive Center. Um, and even without going into it, I knew that it wasn't a museum. And I knew that it went beyond just displaying and showing things to people. I knew that it told the story about whatever it is that's on display, or, whatever panel you might be looking at. And so that's why the Ridge Projects Center is an interpretive center. So I hope that makes sense.
Well, no, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. I want to kind of bring these two concepts together that we spoke about a little while ago as the landscape being the archive, and your response uh, reminded me of why I pushed so hard to call certain things archive, as in not the archive of the colony, but the archive of the stewards of the land, right?
Mhm.
And then when you speak interpretive, how these things have to be interpretive or interpreted to the actual body of the community, because again, it sounds like a reconnection, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Not only for the diaspora of people whose ancestors came to Alabama on the Federal Road, whether they're African American or European descended, but also for the local community. Um, the local community is at the center of everything that we do, our decision making, and the activities and events that we have, um, because just because people live in a community doesn't mean that they're always aware of the value of that community, and especially in a place like Macon County. And I said earlier, a lot of things people have studied and analyzed Macon County to, ad nauseum, but a lot of it, I would say the majority of it, is just been in a negative light and coming from a deficit sort of perspective. So again, it's just really important to help not only the broader audience but the local community understand just how wonderful it is and what a treasure, um, you know, came before the people who live in there now, and the treasure that the descendant community still is.
So with that being said, and you pretty much answered this question already before me asking,
Okay.
but I'm gonna ask it to you specifically uh, with an intention. So when students, teachers, young folk, community members, elders, church members, when they come and engage the interpretive center, what is it that you want them to receive?
Whew. Oh wow. um. Okay. So I want them to really be struck by how connected we are, and by that I mean I want, especially like if people come from outside the local community and they visit the Ridge or they come to one of our events, I want them to not only enjoy what they see and experience it and reflect on it, but I want them to think about how that same um, history might be present in their own places where they live and where they come from. Um, and I want them to leave with an appreciation for everyday people, because everyday people do extraordinary things. And unfortunately, they get the things that they do, their contributions get forgotten intentionally or forgotten unintentionally. Um, and I think that's really unfortunate. And then I want people to leave with the understanding that if 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 the world that we live in the cities that we live in, the counties that we live in. If it was fabric, it would be a tapestry of all kinds of experiences, people, traditions. And again, I think if people have that sense of appreciation and respect for it, even if they have still appreciation, having that basic appreciation for other people, understanding that we're all connected in one way or another, I think it just makes it easier to have some of the hard conversations that we need to have. But for me, I'm going to circle back to the personal aspect to answer that. I said early on that, there's a set of circumstances in my own life that made me thirsty and asked that question about who am I and where do I come from a lot sooner than a lot of people. It helps me to just kind of value myself, right? Because again, I grew up in the 60s when I went to school, the only thing that you learned about African American people was that we were slaves, and that was sort of the period at the end of the sentence. And then we didn't get to learn about other people. Same thing with Native Americans. The John Wayne movies were a big deal when I was growing up,
Right.
right? So you only get that one perspective. So this is fulfilling for me personally, and I sort of want the takeaways to be similar. I mean, I know everybody's different, but I just really want people to have a takeaway of appreciation for what they saw and what they learned about important things, whether it's directly related to their cultural group or not. That there's just that appreciation and respect.
No, I dig it. I think that's super groovy. So, as someone who conducts uh, field ethnographic interviews and oral history interviews, and the gamut of interviews that we have to do, there's always one question I always ask at the end:
Okay.
is there anything that you thought and or hoped that I would ask you that I did not ask you?
Let me think. I really can't think of anything right now. I appreciated that you gave me the opportunity to share my story from a personal standpoint, and then talk about how the ridge came into existence. I think your questions covered pretty much all the bases.
Okay, good, good. And so where can the people find you in the Ridge?
All right, so of course our website, real simple, dig, dig, theridge.com. It's a little play on words there, like dig, like dig, you can actually come and excavate, but dig is in like, theridge.com. And we have a Facebook page, Instagram at TRMCAP. Get you, if you just put that in your search bar, it'll pull up hits for our Facebook page and our Instagram page. Um, and we just encourage people to follow us on Facebook. Um, we've been there for 15 years, and we are about to enter an exciting new chapter in the organization. And just follow us on Facebook, watch our website, and you'll hear more about that very soon, very very soon.
Well, as a non-traditional student myself in pursuit of PhD, thank you very much for breaking ground for us. And also, I didn't know that patrons can come to your site and excavate.
Yeah, those are usually scheduled, and right now our center is only open by appointment, but that's going to soon change. Yeah, we've had elementary to college students and adults do digs at our site. So they're scheduled, and we are really looking forward to offering more opportunities for that to take place in the very near future.
Great. When you have that information, please let me know and I'll share it amongst the folk as well.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you again for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, folks. Y'all know what to do, where to do it, and how to find. Remember, remember, if you don't remember anything, put your story in its proper context, and it's always done by taking initiative. Just like our folklorist of the month of June, Dr. Shari L. Williams. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.